I was driving back from a friend's place late at night. The road was empty, stretching out in front of me like a black ribbon. It was past 2 a.m., and the rain had been falling steadily for the past hour. My windshield wipers worked overtime, but visibility was still terrible. I wasn't in a hurry. There was no traffic, and the route was familiar, a winding road that followed the river for a few miles before cutting through a stretch of thick woods. I had driven it dozens of times before. I knew the curves, the dips, the occasional potholes. I also knew there weren't many houses along this road. That's why the car on the side of the road caught my attention. It was just sitting there, lights off, angled slightly towards the trees. At first, I thought it might be abandoned, but as I got closer, I saw someone standing next to it. A man. He was illuminated for a second by my headlights before I passed. He wasn't waving for help, wasn't trying to flag me down, just standing there. Something felt off. I checked my rearview mirror. The man was still there, unmoving. I slowed down. A part of me told me to keep driving, that it wasn't my problem, but another part, the part that still believed in basic human decency, told me to turn around. What if he needed help? Maybe his car had broken down. Maybe he had been in an accident. I sighed, made a U-turn, and pulled up a few feet behind his car. My headlights bathed him in white light. He was facing away from me, staring towards the river. His shirt was soaked, and not just from the rain. Even through the downpour, I could see it, dark patches of something that wasn't water. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. Blood. A lot of it. I hesitated before stepping out of the car. The cold hit me immediately, rain drenching my jacket within seconds. I approached slowly. "Hey, you okay?" The man didn't react. He kept staring at the river. I tried again. "Sir? Do you need help?" This time he turned his head slightly. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. He looked exhausted. "I'm fine," he said. His voice was calm. Too calm. I glanced at his car. The driver's side door was open, but there was no sign of an accident. No deployed airbags, no dented hood. Just an empty vehicle and a man covered in blood. I took a cautious step closer. "You sure? You're bleeding." The man didn't answer. He turned back toward the river. I followed his gaze. The water was dark and fast-moving from the rain. The bank was steep, lined with jagged rocks. If he jumped, there was no way he'd survive. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. "Sir, let's get you out of the rain," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I can call someone for you." "No need," he murmured. The way he said it made my skin crawl, like he had already made up his mind. I took another step forward, careful not to spook him. "What happened? Did you get hurt?" He let out a small, humorless laugh. "Something like that." Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating everything for a split second. That's when I saw it, the deep gash running along his forearm. Just below the elbow. It was fresh, the blood mixing with rainwater as it dripped onto the pavement. My chest tightened. "You don't have to do this," I said. "Whatever's going on, we can figure it out." His shoulders tensed. He exhaled sharply. "You should go," he said. I shook my head. "Not happening." For the first time, he turned to face me completely. His eyes were unreadable, his expression a mixture of sadness and something else. Resignation. "You don't understand," he whispered. "Then help me understand." A long silence stretched between us. The rain kept falling, the river kept rushing, but in that moment, everything else seemed still. Finally, he spoke. "I wasn't supposed to live." The words sent a shiver down my spine. "What do you mean?" He looked past me, toward the road. "The crash, a few miles back. It should have killed me." I blinked. "What crash?" "My car hit a tree, spun out. Should have died." His voice was flat, like he wasn't talking about himself. I felt my stomach drop. There was no wreck. On the road. I hadn't seen anything like that on my way here. Just his car. "What are you saying?" I asked carefully. He didn't answer. Instead, he took a step toward the river. I moved without thinking. grabbing his arm before he could go any further. His skin was ice cold. "You're in shock," I said. "Come with me. We'll get you checked out." For a second, I thought he would resist, but then his shoulders slumped and he nodded. "Okay." I helped him into my car, cranking the heat. He didn't say anything, just stared out the window, eyes distant. I dialed 911, gave them my location, and told them about the man I had found. The dispatcher's voice was calm. Too calm. "We're sending someone out now," she said. "Can you describe him?" I did. There was a pause. "Sir, are you sure that's what he looks like?" I frowned. "Yeah. Why?" Another pause. "There was a crash earlier tonight, around the area you mentioned." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. The driver didn't make it. The words didn't register at first. I glanced at the man beside me. He was still staring at the rain, his expression unreadable. "That can't be right," I said. "He's sitting right next to me." Silence on the other end. Then softly, "Are you sure?" I turned back to the passenger seat. It was empty. The door was closed. The seat was dry. The only evidence that anyone had been there was the faint smell of rain and something metallic in the air. I didn't sleep that night. When the police arrived, they found the wreckage a few miles down the road, exactly where the man had said. The car was totaled, wrapped around a tree. The driver had died on impact, a man matching my description. I was driving home late at night on a 2-lane road that cut through miles of empty farmland. It was past 1 a.m., and the highway was dead. No other cars, just the occasional reflector post flashing by in my headlights. I liked driving at night. It was quiet, peaceful. I had driven this stretch plenty of times before. It was mostly straight, with a few gentle curves. No streetlights, no houses, just darkness and the sound of my tires against the asphalt. I wasn't tired, but I was zoning out a little, letting the road carry me forward. Then, out of nowhere, something moved in my peripheral vision. A man on a bicycle. He was riding on the shoulder, a few feet from the white line. His shirt was red, baggy, flapping a little in the wind. He wasn't wearing a helmet and I couldn't see his face. His posture was odd, hunched over, pedaling slow, like he wasn't really in a hurry. I tensed. There was no reason for someone to be out here on a bike this late. No houses for miles, no intersections. Just him, alone in the dark. I slowed down slightly, not wanting to pass too close. As I did, he swerved, right in front of me. I barely had time to react. I yanked the wheel left, tires skidding on the wet pavement. For a split second, I thought I hit him. I felt the impact, heard the sickening thud against the front of my car. My stomach lurched. I pulled over immediately, hands shaking. My heart was pounding as I threw the car into park and scrambled out. But the road was empty. The bike, the man, gone. I turned in circles, scanning the ditches, the fields, the darkness beyond my headlights. Nothing. My breath came fast. I checked the front of my car, expecting to see a dent, blood, something. But there was nothing. The hood was clean, the bumper intact. I knew what I had felt. I walked a few feet down the road, looking for any sign of him. Maybe he'd been thrown further. Maybe he was hurt. But the field stretched out, undisturbed, the tall grass swaying gently in the wind. Then I heard it, the faint sound of bicycle wheels spinning. It was coming from behind me. I turned slowly. My headlights were still on, casting a yellow glow across the pavement. And there, just at the edge of the light, was the bicycle, standing upright. No rider. I took a step back, my pulse hammering. The bike wasn't moving, wasn't tipping over, just standing there, balanced perfectly on 2 wheels in the middle of the road. Then it started to roll. No one was pushing it. No wind, no incline. It rolled toward me, slowly at first, then picking up speed. I backed away fast, tripping slightly, as I scrambled for my car. My hands fumbled with the door handle, and just as I got inside and slammed it shut, the bike toppled over, crashing onto the pavement just a few feet away. I locked the doors. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. I didn't know what to do. I could still hear the faint creak of the wheels turning, the chain rattling slightly. I forced myself to take a deep breath. This was ridiculous. I had imagined the impact. Maybe the bike had been there all along. Maybe I just hadn't seen it. Maybe I looked up. In my rearview mirror, just beyond the glow of my taillights, someone was standing in the road. A man. His red shirt was torn, one sleeve hanging loose. His arms dangled at his sides. He wasn't moving. He was just staring at me. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to go. I threw the car into drive and slammed my foot on the gas. My tires screeched as I pulled away, my heart slamming against my ribs. I didn't look back. I pushed the speed limit all the way home, only letting myself breathe normally once I reached my driveway. The moment I turned off the engine, I sat there in silence, hands still gripping the wheel. Had I really seen him? Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe I had imagined it all, the impact, the bike, the man in the mirror. But as I stepped out of the car and turned to go inside, something caught my eye. A single streak of red smudged across my front bumper. It wasn't paint. It was past 2 a.m. when I took the back roads home. I had made this drive before, long stretches of empty road, barely any houses, just fields and woods on either side. It was the kind of road where you didn't see another car for miles. I liked driving at night. Less traffic, just me, the hum of the engine, and the road ahead. The only downside was the stories. People talked about weird things happening on these roads. Mostly nonsense. Old urban legends about ghostly hitchhikers or disappearing headlights. I never paid much attention. Then I saw the family. I came around a curve, and there they were. A man, a woman, and 2 little kids standing on the side of the road. I hit the brakes immediately, heart lurching. My headlights lit them up, just standing there, holding hands, looking up at the sky. I had a split second to take it in. The father was tall, wearing slacks and a button-up. The mother wore a dress, old-fashioned, maybe 1950s style. The kids, maybe 6 or 7 years old, were in pajamas. They shouldn't have been there. There were no houses nearby, no cars parked along the road. Just them. I rolled down my window. "Hey, are you okay?" They didn't react. Didn't even look at me. Just kept staring up at the sky. A weird feeling crawled over me. Maybe they were in shock. Maybe they had been in an accident. I glanced past them, looking for any sign of a wreck, but the road was clear. I put my car in park, leaving the engine running. "Do you need help?" No response. The mother was holding the little girl's hand. The father held the boy's. Their fingers were interlocked, tight, too tight. The way you'd hold on if you were afraid of losing someone. I opened my door and stepped out. "Do you need a ride somewhere?" The father finally moved. He turned his head toward me just slightly. Not enough for me to see his face. Something about it made my stomach twist. The mother didn't move at all. Neither did the kids. They just stood there, still as statues. The back of my neck prickled. This wasn't right. I took a step back toward my car. "I can call someone for you." The father turned a little more. The headlights caught the edge of his jaw. His skin looked wrong, too smooth. Like wax. A feeling of dread settled in my gut. I didn't want to see his face. I didn't want him to turn all the way. Slowly, carefully, I got back in my car. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I put it in drive. The father tilted his head, just slightly, like he was listening. Then, at the same time, all 4 of them turned. Not their heads, their entire bodies, all at once, like marionettes on strings, facing me. I slammed my foot on the gas. My tires screeched against the pavement as I sped off, heart hammering. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see if they were still watching me, or worse, if they were following. I made it home in record time, locked the doors, and sat in silence, trying to make sense of what I had seen. No explanation made sense. They weren't real. They couldn't be. The next day, I checked the news. No reports of missing people. No accidents. Nothing. But when I went out to my car, there was something on my windshield. A single child's handprint, smudged in dirt, too small to be mine. I had been driving for hours. The highway was long and empty. The kind of road where the only company you had was your own thoughts. It was just past midnight, and I was about an hour from home. The last town I passed through was the kind that shut down early. A few scattered houses, a single gas station, and streetlights that barely cut through the darkness. I didn't stop. I wasn't tired, just restless. I wanted to get home. The road stretched ahead, lined with trees on both sides. My headlights were the only source of light. There was no moon, no stars, just the endless black sky and the hum of my tires against the pavement. Then my radio cut out. At first, I thought it was a bad signal. Just static breaking through the music. But then the static got louder. A low, hissing sound that filled the car. I reached for the dial, trying to tune it out, but before I could touch it, something changed. A whisper. Soft. Barely audible under the static. I froze. My fingers hovered over the dial, heart pounding. The whisper wasn't coming from the speakers. It was coming from behind me. I turned the radio off. The car fell into silence, but the uneasy feeling in my gut didn't fade. I swallowed hard and focused on the road. Just my mind playing tricks on me. Too many hours alone. Too much quiet. Then the temperature dropped. Not gradually. Suddenly. 1 second, the car was warm. The next, the air was freezing. My breath fogged up in front of me. My fingers stiffened on the wheel. I glanced at the dashboard. The heater was still on. A chill ran through me. I reached for the vents, trying to adjust the settings. That's when I caught the reflection in the rearview mirror. A woman, sitting in my back seat. I sucked in a sharp breath. My hands jerked on the wheel, and the tires skidded slightly on the wet pavement. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it, in my ears. I looked again. She was still there. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting in her lap. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her dark hair hung in damp strands around her face. Her eyes, wide and hollow, stared straight at me. My throat closed. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles turning white. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stop the car, to get out and run. But I couldn't. I was in the middle of nowhere, alone on a deserted road, and she was still there. My pulse thundered in my ears. I forced myself to look straight ahead, focusing on the road. My breathing was shallow, uneven. I needed to stay calm. Minutes passed, maybe longer. She didn't move, didn't blink. Then, slowly, she raised her hand. Her fingers were too long, thin, bone white. She reached toward me. I yanked my eyes away from the mirror and slammed my foot on the gas. The engine roared as the car surged forward. The trees blurred past, the road stretching endlessly ahead. I didn't care how fast I was. Going. I just needed to get away. And then, she screamed. A shrill, ear-piercing wail filled the car. It wasn't just sound. It was inside my head, rattling my skull, vibrating through my bones. My vision blurred. I nearly lost control of the car. The tires skidded as I struggled to keep it steady. Then, just as suddenly, silence. The freezing. Air lifted. The car smelled like rain. I forced myself to look in the mirror. She was gone. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping. I barely breathed. My hands were shaking when I pulled into my driveway. I sat there in the dark, gripping the wheel, trying to convince myself it hadn't happened. But I knew it had. The next morning, I checked the back seat. Nothing. No sign of her. No trace that anyone had ever been there. But when I shut the car door, I noticed something on the fogged-up window. A single handprint. Too long. Too thin. Not mine. I was driving home late at night, a long stretch of highway ahead of me. It was a 2-hour trip, one I had made dozens of times before. I didn't mind night driving. In fact, I preferred it. No traffic, no noise, just me and the road. That night, the road felt different. The sky was moonless, the darkness thick. My headlights cut through it, but only barely. The trees on either side of the road loomed tall, their outlines barely visible. It was the kind of night that made everything feel just a little too quiet. I had been driving for about an hour when I saw him, a man standing on the side of the road. He was just outside the reach of my headlights, his form barely visible against the darkness. He didn't have a car, no bags, nothing that suggested he was a stranded traveler. He was just there. His clothes looked old, slacks and a button-up shirt, wrinkled and loose on his thin frame. He wasn't holding a sign, wasn't trying to flag me down. He just stood there, staring at the ground. I passed him quickly, my headlights briefly illuminating his face. Or at least, I think it was a face. Something about it was wrong. The shape was there, a nose, a mouth, 2 eyes. But it was blurred, like an old photograph that had faded over time. My brain struggled to make sense of it, as if it couldn't fully process what I had just seen. A chill crawled down my spine. I kept driving. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe I was just tired. I shook it off and focused on the road. Then, a few miles later, I saw him again. Same clothes, same stance, same blurred face, standing by the side of the road. I felt my stomach drop. That wasn't possible. There were no turnoffs, no side roads. I hadn't passed any cars. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of me. I pressed my foot harder on the gas. The road stretched on, empty and unchanging. The only sound was the hum of my engine and the rhythmic thud of my tires against the pavement. I kept my hands tight on the wheel, my pulse picking up speed. 15 minutes passed, then 20. I started to breathe easier, convincing myself I had imagined the second sighting. And then, he was there again, closer this time. Standing just at the edge of the road, his feet almost touching the white line. I saw his face more clearly now. His eyes, if that's what they were nothing but dark, empty spaces. I didn't slow down, didn't check my mirrors, didn't look back. The temperature inside my car dropped. The air felt heavier. My breath fogged up slightly in front of me. My fingers were stiff, my knuckles white from gripping the wheel. I checked the clock. 40 minutes from home. I just had to make it 40 minutes. I kept driving, my heart hammering in my chest. And then, a shape in the road ahead. My stomach lurched. I slammed my foot on the brake. The car skidded slightly before coming to a stop. My headlights lit up the figure standing directly in my path. Him. This time, he was facing me. His head was tilted slightly as if curious. The empty sockets where his eyes should have been seemed deeper now, darker. My hands shook on the wheel. I didn't move. Then, slowly, he took a step forward. A deliberate, steady step. Then another. A tight, suffocating panic settled in my chest. Threw the car into reverse, my tires screeching as I backed up. I blinked, and he was gone. Just gone. The road was empty. I didn't stop to question it. I shifted back into drive and hit the gas, speeding the rest of the way home. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I turned off the engine and sat there, trying to slow my breathing. My hands were still shaking. My skin was cold. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it. That exhaustion had played tricks on me. But when I stepped out of the car, I noticed something. On the back window, a handprint. Too large. Too long. Not mine.